It was a Tuesday. Not even a special Tuesday, just your garden variety middle of the month. Nobody cares Tuesday. Which is exactly why the alien fleet chose it for their arrival, because if you're going to cause a planetary panic, why not do it when everyone's already miserable? The first signs came from amateur astronomers who noticed what they thought were new satellites. 12 hours later, NASA confirmed what the conspiracy theorists had been screaming about in their mothers' basements for decades. We were not alone, and our cosmic neighbors had terrible manners. 7 massive ships, each roughly the size of Manhattan, had positioned themselves in Earth's orbit without so much as a text message warning. The global stock markets crashed within minutes. Religious leaders declared everything from the apocalypse to salvation. Social media imploded with a mixture of memes, panic, and surprising amounts of alien thirst posts. At Space Force headquarters in Colorado Springs, Captain Jack Hawkins was enjoying his 3rd cup of coffee when the alarms blared through the facility. Jack was not what military recruiters typically looked for: chronically sarcastic, allergic to protocol, and possessing what his supervisors called an unhealthy obsession with extraterrestrial behavioral psychology. His official file note: he was competent, but insufferable, and correct in ways that make you want to demote him. Jack's path to Space Force had been unusual. After washing out of Air Force pilot training for excessive creative interpretation of flight parameters, he'd attempted a barrel roll in a cargo plane. He'd earned a PhD in xenopsychology, a field everyone assured him was useless. Until now. Captain Hawkins, General Moore's voice crackled over the intercom. Report to command immediately. Jack took a long, deliberate sip of his coffee. They're finally here, he muttered to himself, and they didn't even RSVP. How rude. As he strode through the hallways, monitors everywhere displayed the same images: 7 obsidian ships, shaped like elongated teardrops, hanging silently over Earth. No emissions, no communications, no clear entry points, just there like the universe's most ominous lawn ornaments. Jack entered command and found absolute chaos. Military personnel shouted over each other, scientists argued equations, and in the center of it all, General Moore looked like he was contemplating early retirement. Hawkins, Moore barked, your ridiculous degree might finally be worth the paper it's printed on. What the hell are they doing? Jack studied the high-resolution images for precisely 5 seconds before answering. Sir, they're waiting. Waiting for what? The general demanded. Jack shrugged. Probably for us to stop screaming and actually say hello. Within 3 hours of the aliens' arrival, the United Nations Security Council had convened an emergency session. The president had been rushed to an undisclosed bunker. And 7 different countries had aimed nuclear weapons at the sky, just in case hospitality needed to be expressed with extreme prejudice. Jack found himself teleconferenced into what was possibly the most important meeting in human history. Yet he couldn't stop noticing that the Australian Prime Minister had toilet paper stuck to his shoe. These vessels have made no attempt at communication, the UN Secretary-General explained, his voice strained with diplomatic panic. We've broadcast greetings in 118 languages, including mathematical sequences suggested by SETI. Nothing. Have we considered they might communicate through different means entirely? Jack offered. Maybe they talk through gravitational waves, or pheromones, or interpretive dance. The silence that followed suggested humor was not on the agenda. Captain Hawkins. A crisp female voice cut through the awkwardness. This isn't a sci-fi convention. Jack's screen split to reveal a woman with steel-grey hair cropped into a severe bob. Her dark suit looked expensive enough to fund a small country's defense budget, and her expression suggested she'd never encountered a joke she couldn't kill with a single glance. Director Vanessa Morgan. National Intelligence, she introduced herself. Captain Hawkins has been assigned to my special response team, effective immediately. Jack nearly spat out his coffee. I have? Yes, Director Morgan continued, as if he hadn't spoken. Your unconventional thinking might prove useful. Report to Andrews Air Force Base in 2 hours. As Director Morgan outlined the situation, the alien ships maintained their perfect orbital formation. They'd shown no reaction to radio signals, light displays, or the experimental dubstep broadcast some genius at NASA thought might get their attention. They just hung there, like 7 cosmic question marks. 5 hours later, Jack found himself in a retrofitted warehouse at Andrews, facing the most improbable team since the last Avengers movie. Quinn Foster was hunched over 3 laptops simultaneously, her fingers flying across keyboards at speeds that suggested either caffeine overdose or minor superpowers. At 28, she was already legendary in tech circles for creating an AI that had beaten chess grandmasters while simultaneously composing surprisingly decent limericks about their playing styles. "The ships are scanning us," Quinn announced without looking up. "Soft scans, they're being careful not to irradiate us." Almost polite, actually. Beside her stood Professor Dmitry Volkov, a hulking figure with a magnificent white beard that compensated for his completely bald head. The world's foremost xenolinguist, Volkov had created theoretical frameworks for alien language communication despite having never met an actual alien. Until today, this had seemed like building a swimming pool in Antarctica, technically impressive but practically useless. "The question is not what they want," Volkov rumbled in his thick Russian accent, "but why they do not tell us what they want. Silence is also communication." Director Morgan strode in, accompanied by military aides carrying stacks of classified folders. "The President has authorized first contact protocols," she announced. "We have 48 hours to establish communication before the Security Council votes on more aggressive options." "You mean blowing them up?" Jack clarified, and Morgan's expression didn't change. "Several nations believe a preemptive strike is prudent, because nothing says welcome to Earth like nuclear annihilation," Jack muttered. "Your alternative suggestions are welcome, Captain," Morgan replied icily. Jack stood and approached the enormous screen displaying the alien vessels. "We're thinking about this all wrong. These ships could have attacked immediately. They didn't. They could have positioned themselves threateningly. Instead, they're in a perfect harmonic orbit. They're not here to conquer, they're waiting for something specific." "Like what?" Quinn asked. Jack grinned. "That's what we're going to find out. But first we need to stop trying to talk and start trying to listen." The next 24 hours witnessed what could only be described as humanity's most embarrassing talent show. The Chinese sent up a probe that projected complex mathematical equations. The aliens ignored it. India launched a satellite broadcasting ancient Sanskrit mantras and classical ragas. The aliens continued their silence. The Europeans contributed an elaborate light show combined with electromagnetic pulses in sequential prime numbers. Nothing. And nothing. The Americans, never to be outdone, sent up a spacecraft blasting everything from Bach to Beyoncé, accompanied by the entire text of Wikipedia encoded in binary. The aliens remained unmoved. Jack watched these attempts with increasing amusement from the makeshift command center, which Quinn had dubbed the panic room. "We look like desperate teenagers trying to get noticed at a dance," he observed, unwrapping his 4th candy bar of the day. "Has anyone considered they might think we're annoying?" "Captain Hawkins," Director Morgan snapped, "if you have insights to share, please do so constructively." Jack tossed his candy wrapper into a wastebasket. "They haven't responded to any traditional first contact methods. That means either they don't understand or they don't care. I'm betting on the latter." Professor Volkov nodded thoughtfully. "There is old Russian saying, if bear does not respond to your greeting, perhaps you are speaking to rock." "Are you suggesting they're not intelligent?" Morgan asked. Quite the opposite," Jack replied. "I think they're so intelligent they find our attempts primitive. It's like we're sending smoke signals to a civilization with quantum telepathy." Wynne, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly straightened in her chair. "Guys, I think I found something." All eyes turned to her screens, where complex data patterns scrolled past. "The ships aren't completely silent," she explained. "They're emitting incredibly faint gravitational distortions at regular intervals, almost like a heartbeat." Jack moved closer. "Can you visualize it?" Quinn typed furiously, and soon the screen displayed a waveform, a repeating pattern that pulsed with perfect rhythm. "It's too regular to be natural," Jack murmured. "They're definitely communicating something." "But what?" Director Morgan demanded. Jack stared at the pattern, the gears in his mind turning. Then he laughed so suddenly that Professor Volkov spilled his tea. "They're bored," Jack announced. "These patterns, they're exactly like the neural patterns of someone waiting impatiently." "You cannot possibly know that," Morgan objected. "Actually, he might be right," Quinn interrupted, pulling up comparison charts. "These patterns match what we see in human brains during periods of anticipation or waiting." Jack began pacing excitedly. Think about it, a species advanced enough to travel between stars wouldn't just show up without a plan. They expected something specific to happen when they arrived, and it didn't. Now they're waiting, and we're just making noise at them. Professor Volkov stroked his beard thoughtfully. In old Russian fairy tales, forest spirits only speak to those who know their true names. Exactly. Jack snapped his fingers. We need to stop trying random things and figure out what specifically they came here expecting. "And how do you propose we do that?" Morgan asked. Jack's grin widened. "We need to think like them. If you traveled across the galaxy to visit Earth, what would you expect as a reception?" The team fell silent, contemplating this question. "An official welcome," Morgan suggested. "We've tried that," Jack countered. "Perhaps they expect tribute," Volkov offered. "Or maybe," Quinn said slowly, "they expected us to already know who they are." Jack froze. "Quinn, you beautiful genius, that's it. These aren't first-time visitors they think we're expecting them." "That's absurd," Morgan objected. "We would know if aliens had contacted Earth before." "Would we?" Jack raised an eyebrow. History is full of unexplained phenomena, ancient civilizations with impossible knowledge of astronomy, religious texts describing beings from the sky. You're suggesting these aliens have visited Earth before, and they think we remember them? Morgan looked skeptical. "I'm suggesting," Jack replied, "that we need to stop treating this like first contact and start treating it like a reunion." "This," Director Morgan declared, "is the most ridiculous plan I have ever heard." The conference room had gone eerily quiet after Jack finished his presentation. Quinn was trying not to laugh, Professor Volkov was nodding enthusiastically, and the military observers looked like they were calculating how quickly they could transfer to other departments. To summarize, Morgan continued, massaging her temples, "You want us to broadcast a message saying, 'Welcome back, we've been expecting you,' pretend we know exactly who they are, and essentially bluff our way through first contact with an alien species that could potentially obliterate our planet." Jack grinned. "Exactly. Except when you say it like that, it sounds crazy." "It is crazy," Morgan exploded. "This isn't a poker game, Captain." "Actually, it kind of is," Jack countered. "Think about it, if they've been here before, they expect us to recognize them. If they haven't, well, what's the harm in being polite? Either way, we're taking control of the narrative." Quinn raised her hand tentatively. "I've analyzed their positioning more carefully. The 7 ships are arranged in a pattern that matches the Pleiades star cluster, the 7 sisters in Greek mythology. Many ancient cultures attributed special significance to the Pleiades, including stories about visitors from those stars." Professor Volkov's eyes widened. "The Hopi called them Chu-Hoti, the Russians Stozhari. They appear in myths worldwide." "A coincidence," Morgan dismissed. "Director," Jack said, suddenly serious, "in 24 hours, the Security Council votes on whether to launch nukes at visitors who have shown no aggression. My ridiculous plan might be our last chance to avoid what could be the shortest, most disastrous war in human history." Morgan stared at him for a long moment. "And if you're wrong?" "Then I'll personally write the report explaining how I screwed up humanity's first alien encounter," Jack replied. "Though I suspect there won't be much paperwork if they decide to vaporize us." After an excruciating silence, Morgan sighed. "Fine. You have 12 hours to implement this plan, but I want continuous monitoring and emergency protocols ready." Jack saluted with mock formality. "Yes, ma'am. Quinn, we need the most powerful broadcast system available. Dimitri, help me craft a message that sounds like we're greeting old friends without being specific enough to contradict whatever they expect." "And what will you be doing?" Morgan asked suspiciously. Jack's expression turned mischievous, shopping for the welcome party, of course. The next 12 hours witnessed one of the strangest operations in military history. While the world held its collective breath, Jack's team prepared what he called Operation Act Natural. Quinn hijacked satellite networks worldwide to create an unprecedented broadcasting platform. Professor Volkov composed a greeting that drew on universal welcome rituals from hundreds of Earth cultures, and Jack, inexplicably, requisitioned 7 enormous spotlights, tons of glitter, and enough fireworks to celebrate New Year's Eve in Times Square. The glitter is essential, he insisted when Morgan questioned the expenditure. Trust me, no species crosses interstellar space without appreciating a good light show. As 0 hour approached, world leaders were briefed on the plan. Their reactions ranged from cautious approval to outright declarations that Earth was doomed. The Chinese premier memorably commented that if humanity must end, at least we will do so with an impressive display of illumination. Jack stood on the roof of the command center, watching as Quinn's team positioned the massive spotlights in a pattern matching the alien ships. This is either going to be the greatest first contact in history, he mused, or the most embarrassing last moment of human civilization. Professor Volkov joined him, carrying 2 glasses of vodka. In Russia we have saying, if bear is going to eat you, might as well dance first. Jack accepted the glass. To dancing with bears, Professor. They clinked glasses as the countdown began. At precisely midnight Eastern Standard Time, humanity executed the strangest first contact protocol in the brief history of extraterrestrial relations. 7 enormous spotlights blazed to life, each targeting one of the alien ships. Simultaneously, Quinn activated the global broadcast system, transmitting Professor Volkov's carefully crafted message. Welcome back, friends from the Seven Sisters. Earth acknowledges your return as foretold. We await the continuation of our ancient dialogue. For 60 excruciating seconds, nothing happened. Jack held his breath. Morgan gripped the edge of the command console so tightly her knuckles turned white. Quinn's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to try emergency protocols. Then, the alien ships began to glow, starting faintly at first, then with increasing brilliance, each massive vessel illuminated until they outshone the moon. Colors rippled across their surfaces, blues, purples, golds forming patterns that seemed almost celebratory? It's working, Jack whispered in disbelief. Don't celebrate yet, Morgan cautioned. The ships suddenly shifted position, rearranging themselves into a perfect circle above the Earth. Then, without warning, they released what appeared to be thousands of smaller objects, each about the size of a car, that descended rapidly toward the atmosphere. Are those weapons? Morgan demanded, reaching for the red emergency phone. Wait, Quinn shouted, eyes glued to her monitors. They're not on attack trajectories. They're dispersing evenly around the planet. The objects slowed as they entered the atmosphere, hovering approximately 1 mile above major population centers worldwide. For a breathless moment, they simply hung there, glittering like stars brought down to Earth. Then they exploded. Fire. Not in fire and destruction, but in spectacular displays of light and color that made the most elaborate fireworks show look like a child's sparkler. Above every major city on Earth, the sky erupted into a cosmic light show of impossible complexity and beauty. In the command center, everyone stood transfixed. Jack slowly began to laugh. They think we're throwing them a welcome party, he managed between fits of laughter. They're responding in kind. That's impossible, Morgan breathed. But the evidence was literally written in the sky. Professor Volkov's translation algorithm finally began making sense of the patterns. They're transmitting a message in what appears to be several ancient Earth languages simultaneously. The translation appeared on the main screen. Greetings, children of Earth. The Seven Sisters acknowledge your remembrance. The celestial cycle returns as promised to prepare for the renewal of our covenant. Jack's smile faded. Covenant. What covenant? Before anyone could speculate, the screen lit up with an incoming transmission. The aliens were sending data packets directly to Earth's communication systems. Quinn worked frantically to process the information. It's a historical record. Images, text in various ancient languages, astronomical data. She gasped, "Oh my God!" The screen filled with images that looked like ancient cave paintings, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Sumerian tablets, except these versions included clear depictions of the teardrop-shaped vessels and beings that resembled elongated humans with slightly larger eyes. According to this, Quinn explained as she scrolled through the data, they'd been visiting Earth every 3,600 years since before recorded history. They claim to have helped early human civilizations develop astronomy, mathematics, agriculture. And they expected us to remember this, Morgan asked incredulously. Not US specifically, Jack realized. They thought our civilization would have preserved the knowledge of their cycle. They're not angry, they're confused that we didn't recognize them. Professor Volkov was rapidly translating more of the transmitted data. It says here that they last visited during the height of ancient Mesopotamia. They expected to find a unified Earth civilization eagerly awaiting their return to exchange knowledge and cultural achievements. So basically, Jack summarized, they're ancient tourists returning to check on their favorite exhibit, and they're disappointed we didn't keep better records. A new message appeared on screen. Request immediate dialogue with Earth leaders. Confusion detected in your response patterns. Jack looked at Morgan. Director, I think it's time we admitted we have no idea who they are. Morgan closed her eyes briefly. The president is going to love this. Within hours, a delegation was assembled. The aliens requested a meeting at the ancient site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, apparently one of their original landing sites from 12,000 years ago. As Jack prepared to join the delegation, Quinn pulled him aside. There's something else in their data transmission, she whispered. According to their records, they didn't just teach early humans, they modified us genetically. They claim to be our ancestors, in a way. Jack absorbed this information silently. So they're basically returning to check on how their science experiment turned out. Bruh. More like proud parents coming to graduation, Quinn suggested. Let's hope they grade on a curve, Jack muttered. 6 months after the arrival of the Seven Sisters fleet, Captain Jack Hawkins found himself in the strangest debriefing of his career. To summarize, General Moore read from an absurdly thick folder. The aliens who call themselves the Pleiades Collective have confirmed that they genetically modified early hominids, guided the development of ancient civilizations, and expected us to maintain accurate records of their 3,600-year visitation cycle. Pretty much, Jack agreed. They were dismayed to discover we'd forgotten them entirely and had developed nuclear weapons, reality television, and pineapple pizza in their absence. The pineapple pizza bothered them the most, Jack noted. Apparently they're traditionalists about food. General Moore continued reading. After diplomatic negotiations, they've agreed to establish a cultural exchange program, share limited technology appropriate to our development level, and return in 100 years, rather than 3,600, to, and I quote, make sure we haven't blown ourselves up. They're also really into our cat videos, Jack added helpfully. Transmitted about 6 zettabytes of them back to wherever they came from. Moore closed the folder with a sigh, which brings us to the matter of public knowledge. Mo. Al. The president has determined that humanity isn't ready for the full truth. Jack raised an eyebrow. Sir, the ships were visible worldwide. Everyone saw the light show. Yes, and as of today, the official explanation is a rare atmospheric phenomenon, combined with an elaborate international satellite test, Moore stated flatly. That's completely ridiculous, Jack protested. Exactly why it will work, Morgan interjected, entering the room. People accept ridiculous explanations for extraordinary events more readily than the truth. It makes them feel safer. And the thousands of government officials, scientists, and military personnel who know the truth, Jack asked, have all signed non-disclosure agreements with penalties that would make treason charges look like a parking ticket, Morgan replied crisply. Including you, Captain. Jack leaned back in his chair. So that's it? Humanity's greatest moment, discovering we're part of a galactic community, and we're just going to pretend it never happened. For now, Morgan said, her expression softening slightly. The Pleiades representatives agreed that instant revelation would be destabilizing for Earth societies. The knowledge will be released gradually over decades. Meanwhile, General Moore added, "You and your team are being reassigned to the newly formed Interstellar Relations Bureau, operating under deep cover as advanced theoretical research." Jack considered this. "So I get to keep working with Quinn and Dmitri?" "Professor Volkov has already accepted a position as chief xenolinguist," Morgan confirmed. "And MS. Foster is designing our secure communication protocols with the Pleiades outpost they're establishing on Europa." "You know," Jack mused, "when I wrote my dissertation on potential alien psychology, my advisor said I was wasting my time on science fiction." "Where is your advisor now?" Moore asked. "Teaching introductory psychology at a community college in Nebraska." "Well," Moore replied with the first smile Jack had ever seen on his face, "perhaps we should keep it that way." 1 year later, when people occasionally wondered whatever happened to those strange lights in the sky, they quickly moved on to more pressing matters. The official explanation, though flimsy, gave them permission to stop thinking about it. Humans, as it turned out, were remarkably good at not asking questions when the answers might fundamentally change their understanding of their place in the universe. In his new office deep beneath Cheyenne Mountain, Jack Hawkins reviewed the latest communications from the Pleiades outpost. Quinn had decorated the room with 7 small star-shaped lights, a private joke about their cosmic visitors. Professor Volkov had taken to wearing a tie with tiny spaceship patterns. "Captain," Quinn called from her workstation, "the Pleiades ambassador is requesting your presence for their cultural orientation session. Apparently they want to understand this human concept of sarcasm." Jack grinned. "This should be interesting. Tell them I'm absolutely thrilled to explain human humor for 5 hours straight." "Was that sarcasm?" Quinn asked with a smirk. "No, Quinn," Jack replied, heading for the door. "That was diplomacy. And that's why no one asks what happened to the alien fleet that entered Earth's orbit without announcing themselves. Sometimes the truth isn't so much stranger than fiction as it is more paperwork."